next panel is about human beings. The next panel is actually Asian Americans Forum, and our moderator, he is a very accomplished gentleman, and it's my great pleasure to introduce to you the 21st governor of the great state of Washington. He was the Secretary of Commerce from 2009 to 2011, and he was the ambassador to China from 2011 to 2014. Now let's give a big hand for Gary Locke. Gary Locke, welcome.
Well, let's bring up all of our other panelists. Attorney General William Tong. Joe is also a member of the panel, and Professor Yaxing Wang. So come on up, come on up. I'm not gonna stand, so I'll sit too. So yeah, I don't know if we can move this. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and we want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for questions. So think of any questions that you might have, and we'll be sure to have good audience participation. I'm really honored to be participating and being with a group of three very, very distinguished individuals. We have Attorney General William Tong from the state of Connecticut, who's in his second term, and maybe should be the next governor or U.S. Senator from Connecticut. Would be great to have more Asian Americans and Chinese Americans in the leading our states, or certainly in the halls of Washington, D.C. We also have two distinguished academics, Professor Yaxing Wang from MIT. He also heads up the Asian American Scholar Forum, which is really devoted to the protection and advocacy of Asian American faculty across our colleges, universities, at a time of a lot of attack and suspicion and examination and scrutiny of our Asian American scholars, especially Chinese American. And then we also have, who's been somewhat the moderator of these afternoon sessions, stand-up comedian Joe Wong. So it's really a pleasure to have all of you here. I'm going to start by just asking each of you just to give a little background about how you came to be where you are, how you grew up, and how you ended up pursuing your particular endeavor and profession. So we'll start with Attorney General William Tong of Connecticut.
So I'll try to do this quick. Let me thank Ping-Ni and the entire conference and all the staff for having us here today. Can we give the staff a round of applause, please, for taking such good care of us? This is a real thrill to be on a panel moderated by Gary Locke, because I wanted to be Gary Locke when I grew up. And still the only Chinese American, right, elected in our nation's history as a governor.
First Asian American on the mainland and the first Chinese American throughout all of America.
I am the first Chinese American elected Attorney General in the history of our country. But I'm not the first Chinese American Attorney General, because they have appointed attorneys general in Hawaii, so the Hawaii people screw the whole thing up for me. Let me just say quickly, my story is typical of a particular immigration pattern from the late 60s and early 70s. My family is from Jiangsu. On my mom's side, my father's from Guangdong, and they ran for their lives. And by perseverance and hard work and not a little bit of luck, a great deal of luck, my parents met in a Chinese restaurant in Connecticut, of all places. It was called the Hong Kong Kitchen, believe it or not. And I was born the first American citizen in my immediate family by right of my birth on American soil. So I'm a U.S. citizen not because my parents are citizens. I'm a U.S. citizen because the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution says I'm a citizen. Yes, it's true for a lot of people in this room. Let me just fast forward. You asked a question how I got here. I served 12 years in the legislature. I'm a lawyer by training, of course, and then I was elected Attorney General by the people of Connecticut in 2018. I'm the first Asian American elected to any state office in Connecticut's history, and the first statewide elected Asian American. But the reason why I'm here is because I grew up in a Chinese restaurant, and I worked side by side with my parents in that Chinese restaurant, cooking, cleaning, washing dishes. And when you watch your parents work 7 days a week, 12 to 15 hours a day, and you see how hard they struggle, you see how people mistreat them and underestimate them, and you see them sacrifice and suffer. And then when you're called off the bench in 6th grade, 7th grade to do the same thing, to work side by side with your parents so we could keep our family's Chinese restaurant open, then you know how hard it is for so many people, not just in our community, but in many communities across this country. And you just grow up with a sense that you want to help them. You want to help your parents, you want to help your family, you want to help people just like them. And because they made these extraordinary sacrifices, I got to go to some pretty good schools. And I had the opportunity to become a lawyer and then run for office.
Why did you run for office?
So it goes back to that restaurant. Anybody work in a Chinese restaurant? Or something like a Chinese restaurant? Okay. There was a door, and the door had a diamond plexiglass window. And there was a door from the kitchen to the dining room. And when you work in a Chinese restaurant in the kitchen all night, it's hot, it's chaotic, it's noisy. My parents are screaming at me all night. And I remember walking by that door hundreds of times a night as a 10-year-old. And I would look through the door, through the window in the door, and I would look in the dining room, and I would see all of our customers. And while I'm very grateful to those customers, you know, they paid for my life. They made it possible. I could see that none of those customers looked like me. And I wondered if those customers knew how hard my parents were working, how much they struggled, how much they suffered. And I just wanted to kick the door in and get in the dining room and make sure that they understood how hard we were working to serve them. And I wanted to be in the dining room myself and to be a part of what was happening there, to have a seat at the table, literally. And I think that drove me to public service and ultimately to run for office.
Great. Professor Wong, distinguished career at MIT and leading workshops helping entrepreneurs of all sizes, both in the United States and in China. How did you end up in an academic career, and why did you focus on business and also U.S.-China relations? How did you come about to that?
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador Locke, for moderating this very important panel. In 2018, I came to Chicago and spoke at the U.S.-China Business Conference that was organized by Goldman Sachs. And that was a very, very different time when U.S. and China began to have tensions and problems, but at least they had a pragmatic approach toward each other. So it was I'm sorry to say it was a much bigger conference than this at that time. So I was born and raised in China. Like Joe, many of us came to the United States to study. He became a comedian, and I wasn't funny enough, so I didn't choose that career. But I was serious enough to be an academic, and for a long period of time, we didn't have to think about your identity, right? So Joe said that U.S.-China relationship is like having a mother and a wife. Also, it could be having a mother and mother-in-law. When mother-in-law and mother got along, we didn't really have to think about that relationship. And that characterized much of the majority of the time when people like us came to the United States to study, and then later on went into academia, went into business, went into other professions. But since 2018, right, the first Trump shock, the tariff, and accelerating during the Biden administration and continuing on today, we had to think about this identity question more and more. And one critical issue is, do you have to make a choice, right? Do you have to make a choice between being a Chinese and being an American? And this is extraordinarily difficult decision and choice for people like me, maybe like others in the room, to think about. But then the reality has a way of forcing that choice upon us. In 2021, the Trump-appointed Attorney General in Massachusetts charged my colleague, Professor Gang Chen, with wire fraud. I mean, technically speaking, wire fraud is sending false information through wire to the federal government. Technically, it was about disclosure to the grant that Professor Chen applied from Department of Energy. And the charge was that he didn't fully disclose the activities that he was undertaking, and therefore there was a violation of the grant regulations. I mean, I don't want to bore you with the details. None of that was true. And the Justice Department has such a thin case that when the new Attorney General came into the office in Massachusetts, and she couldn't even find proper paperwork to continue the case. I'm not a lawyer, so I would defer to William on this question. Usually, the US government will not drop the case just like that. But in this particular situation, they dropped everything. Everything, right? Not even a minor charge. So it was that case that motivated a group of us to create an organization. At that time, we created Chinese American Scholar Forum. Later on, we want to broaden the appeal and the approach, so we renamed the organization as Asian American Scholar Forum. The board members have Chinese Americans, Indian Americans, Japanese Americans. Our goal is to promote the academic freedom and basic research and the dignity and human rights of Asian American academics. So we have been doing a number of things. I'll be happy to go into details about them, but let me just name one. In the last 2 years, we have organized annual conferences at Stanford. And at these conferences, we have produced videos, short videos of contributions by Asian American scientists and technologists to American economy, to American technologies. Many of the technologies inside our iPhone, they're working behind the scene. You know, people know about Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, but many people didn't know that many of the technologies inside the iPhone were actually the products of Chinese American technologists and scientists, Asian American technologists and scientists. Siri, for example, was invented by Indian American scientists. So we want the general public to know more about these contributions. And one of the first engines developed by Boeing was actually the brainchild of a Chinese American scientist, a graduate from MIT, in the early part of the 20th century, right? So we're showing these videos. The PBS has an airing of a documentary, Chinese, Asian American unknown stories in Silicon Valley. I'm organizing a showing at MIT on December 3rd. And next Chinese New Year, we're going to have showings of these other videos showcasing the contributions made by Asian Americans. Let me just conclude on this point.
Let's get back to some of this later. We need to get to Joe, and then we'll rotate.
Just
Okay.
one very quick point.
I'm the professor here trying to keep the class moving.
You will get an A. Yeah, so I really admire Gary and William for one of the few Chinese Americans going into politics, right? So this is one area we need to go. Thank you so much.
Great. I said that we had two academics on the panel. The other academic is actually Joe Wong. And, he's got a PhD from Rice University in the year 2000, and he actually wrote a paper called the Drosophila inebriated Rosa A transporter, dual roles in the control of neuronal excitability and osmotic stress response. So how does a person go from being a cancer researcher to being a stand-up comedian?
That's a very good question. Mostly because I didn't achieve my academic goals.
What were they?
I wanted to be a professor in the beginning, but after a couple of papers, I got stuck in academia. Like for 3 years, I just couldn't make any discovery. I remember I have to inject genes into frog oocytes, basically frog eggs. You can't even see them. You have to see them under a microscope. I have to inject 400 a day to find the substrate for the protein we study. So after when people can't sleep, they count sheep. I just count frog eggs in my eyes. So eventually, I decided to just go to a company, and I worked in a biotech company for almost 10 years. But then later on, I got laid off. This happened to 10, 20 years ago, and it turns out because I was laid off, the reason was because they're outsourcing some of their jobs overseas to China. And that's the moment I feel like a real American. But then from that point on, I just started to pursue stand-up comedy. One of the reasons is because when I was in college, I published a paper on campus newspaper. And one of the comments I got from one of the English teachers was like, "Hey, who knew a Chinese has a sense of humor?" Yeah, at the time I was pretty shocked. And then later I realized that the Chinese has a stereotype of being hardworking, very serious, and nobody tells any jokes.
You do look kind of nerdy.
Oh, yes. So technically, I think I belong more to the AI panel than this one. Yeah, but then from that point on, I was like, maybe I should do something different. That's kind of the purpose. And also, you and other people here are also my inspiration. I just feel that even as a Chinese person in America, I could carve out a path that's not well trodden by others. So.
Professor Wong did raise an interesting point. I'm going to ask each of you to comment on it. Are we Chinese or are we American? and I guess I'd like to go first on that. When I was in the 3rd grade, our teacher every day would ask all of the kids, "What did you have for breakfast?" Yeah. And if it wasn't, where I grew up, it was a large kids of immigrants, Japanese, Filipino, Chinese, Italian. And if we did not respond with the traditional breakfast saying we had ham and eggs or bacon or sausage or whatever, we had our hands slapped. And I was always having my hands slapped because Mom was always making shifan or juk. Yeah. And adding vegetables to oatmeal and everything else. And so actually I was eating a very, very healthy breakfast, but I had my hands slapped. And so it forced a lot of us immigrant kids to reject our culture and move, anything that our parents want us to do in terms of language, culture, customs, we stayed away from. And it wasn't later on until I was in college that I realized that I can be both. I am American, but I'm also Chinese. That's why I'm Chinese American. And sometimes we think of America, when we say, "Are you American?" We're really saying, "Are you Caucasian?" Right? Is your daughter dating American or Chinese? well, wait, that Chinese person is born in the United States. He's American. So why do we think of American as white? So anyway, William.
So my answer to that question is Chinese is American. And I want to share a quick story. Amara Wacker is a CNN correspondent. She's Korean American. She was in New Orleans at the airport, and she was walking with her film crew. You could tell she's a big-time reporter, and somebody started shouting racist things at her. And it really shook her up. This was a few years ago. So she went home and she went on Twitter at the time, and she wrote about this experience. And she wrote about how she is a Korean American, born in the United States, grew up here, and had never considered that she was anything other than American. And she wrote, "I'm as American as Korean barbecue." And that resonated with me. I'm as American as pork fried rice. It is as American as anything else your classmates ate. And the sooner we embrace that truth and stand for it and claim that truth, the better off we'll be. But if there is a stereotype about us, right, that maybe has a kernel of truth, is that we don't fight hard enough for ourselves, right, and insist that Chinese is American. There's no choice. I was born here. I'm an American. I'm ethnically Chinese. Deal with it. I'm an American, Jack. I'm as American as anybody else.
Joe, you do stand-up comedy and you have a television show in China. You're actually Korean ancestry, but you relate to yourself as Chinese. So when you're here in the United States or in China, so when you're here in the United States or in China, I mean, how do you resolve that dilemma, and do people try to pigeonhole you into one or the other?
I'm easier to pigeonhole because of my accent, I think. But the thing is, I can still relate to your story at school when I was working as an adult in an American company in Boston. Because I bring my own lunch, a lot of times pretty healthy, stir-fried vegetables. Some guy in my company just pointed at my food, just said to me, "Oh, that is gay."
That is what?
That is gay.
Oh.
I was like, what? You're eating a hot dog. I know it's a little bit off color for this occasion, but I just it's just so ridiculous. People judge you by the type of food or what kind of clothes you wear. But I want to raise one point that may slightly disagree with both of you guys. Sometimes I think we just should emphasize more on the fact that we're all humans instead of just say, hey, I'm an American, but I shouldn't be treated that way. I found that very heartbreaking during the pandemic. A lot of people say, oh, I'm an American, you can't treat me that way. That just implies that we can treat non-Americans that way. There are a lot of Asians living in this country, they have a green card.
Yes.
Or they just have a visa here, but they're not Americans. But I think they deserve to be treated like a human being as well. And the flip side is if people think that, oh, I can treat non-US citizens in a bad way, they can't tell Asian Americans from Asians from Asia, for most Americans. So we have to kind of uphold the general human value, just say, hey, we should treat every person with respect. Well, that's just my point here.
Okay. Professor Wong, you first raised the topic.
Yeah, so I think as a cultural matter, as a cultural identity, we shouldn't have to even think about making that choice.
Yes.
Right? Whether eating, shijo or spaghetti, that's really not relevant. And also, I believe that bringing Chinese culture, bringing Asian culture to American society is also enriching this society. So we have absolutely nothing to apologize because of that. But the issue, I think, there's a more difficult issue, which is about your political obligations. And there, when the two countries have a good relationship, you don't have to think about that issue. So when I was saying that you have to think about that choice, I was really thinking in political terms, whether or not you think about yourself as more of an American citizen or more as a Chinese citizen. My reasoning there is that I have made a conscious decision to stay in this country because I personally support a democratic system, a free market system, and intellectual freedom that I have enjoyed. So I made that decision. And if there's, and I also want to work to promote good relationship between China and the United States. But when there is a serious conflict between the two countries, then I think it's really hard not to think about that issue. I still have not made my decision yet, but I don't think we can completely avoid thinking about that issue if the relationship seriously deteriorates to the point where we have to think about that issue, right? And so, but I just want to say that everything we do is try to save the relationship from deteriorating so far, then we don't have to think about the issue. That would be the first best case scenario.
Well, I think that we're seeing, certainly from the pandemic, a rise of violence against Asian Americans, really trying to target Chinese Americans. It did not help when the president called it the Wuhan virus, the Kung Flu virus, the China virus. And so a lot of Asian Americans, specifically Chinese Americans, were targeted and blamed for the incredible shutdown and the just the tension that America went through during those several years. William, as Attorney General, what did you see happening in your state, and what were you trying to do about that?
Yeah, this has all been very personal and very painful for a lot of us. And when the 7 Asian American women were murdered in Georgia, and then Michelle Go, and then Yao Pan Man, list goes on and on, all of us, I think, took it very personally. And when it started happening, people turned to me, the only one, and said, do something. And I tried to convene, I had a national convening in Washington, D.C. of attorneys general, but I'm the only one. And part of the reason why this happens, and part of the reason why your colleagues, it doesn't just happen at MIT, it happens at Yale, as you know, to people that I know in my home state. The reason why we're targeted is because we have relatively little political power. If you only have one Gary Locke and one William Tong and Grace Meng and a few others, our voice is not strong enough to push back when the President of the United States blames you for a global pandemic, or when people put a target on our backs and literally murder us, push us on the train tracks, beat us to death when we're delivering, I think Yao Pan Ma was delivering food. It was a pastry chef. And when you have open and free license to target academics because no one will show up to stand up and fight for them because there's relatively little political power. And I will tell you, there's no excuse for that. We've been here a long time. There was a Chinese American from Connecticut who fought for the Union in the U.S. Civil War.
Whoa.
Okay, Young Wing came to Yale a long time ago. Okay, there's no excuse for the lack of political power that we have, except that we have not developed it, we have not focused on it, and here we are. There isn't enough critical mass, and there are other communities that, frankly, came after that are doing a lot better and have more political power than we do now. That's the hard truth.
Well, Joe, in your humor, how do you try to address this issue? And I think you've said that we need more representation throughout various industries. And so how do you use your humor to try to either educate your audience or to kind of promote different thinking?
Yeah, I think the key is everybody has to be kind of like a broken record. The reason I'm saying this is, I learned from the African American community. Sometimes when I watch their stand-up comedy set, they always bring up their history, You know, some of them are just really horrendous, you know, like slavery and stuff. Sometimes like, why one after another, they always say this thing. Until I did a show at Andrew Yang's fundraiser in San Francisco, I mentioned the fact that I talked about Chinese Exclusion Act. And after that, some white audience members came up to me and said, "Oh, thank you so much for talking about that. Oh, I just knew you guys built a railroad. I didn't know you guys were thrown into concentration camps." I was like, okay, that's not correct either. It's what happened to the Jews in Europe. You know, this is actually happened on American soil. But nobody actually knows this, even though so many Asian authors and TV hosts and politicians talked about it. Still, nobody remembers this. So we have to keep talking about it. And also, another point is, Asian Americans are 5% of the population. In terms of percentage, it's really small, but the absolute number is still huge. If everybody makes their own voice heard, it's still tremendous. So it's really important that we raise issues we don't feel comfortable with, and also support people who are raising voices for us. That's very important too. Even if it comes down to as simple as just give them more likes on social media, or write some comments on their opinions. All these adds up to the eventual political power. Because in America, politics has a lot to do with the number of people that come and support you. So we really have to be mindful of this fact that know who supports Asian voices and support them. And I have to also say that it's not just Asian politicians support Asian causes. Even some politicians, like Latinos, African Americans, a lot of those and white senators and so forth, some of them support Asian causes too, and we need to support those voices as well. Yeah.
That's a very important point. Asian Americans and any ethnic group can't just rely on their own community to advance their issues or protect their issues. We all need to form alliances, whether it's with the NAACP, whether it's with Hispanic groups, civil rights groups, ACLU, and Jewish organizations. Each group has faced a lot of discrimination, and we need to band together. We need to support when other groups, we need to voice our concerns, intervene, get active when other groups are being attacked, because if we don't support other groups when they're down, why should they come and help us? So, Professor Wong.
So I think the pandemic was a wake-up call. Many of us didn't underestimate the degree of racial discrimination that still existed in 21st century in America. I think there was a complacency among Chinese Americans, and also I got this from Indian Americans as well, which is that we have achieved very high social status. Look at universities, look at law firms, Wall Street, Silicon Valley. 2 months ago, I was in Berlin, and I visited the Jewish Museum in Berlin. And I was surprised to learn that right before the rise of Hitler, under Weimar Republic, the Jewish Germans achieved extremely high social status. One of the foreign ministers was Jewish. Right? 90%, 80% of the movies were made by Jewish directors. High social status does not save you from racial discrimination, from racial policies. Ultimately speaking, it is rule of law. So I want to argue that China Initiative and all these things are terribly dangerous to the Chinese American community, but I'm also extremely worried about the erosion of rule of law under the current administration. Ultimately speaking, that is going to be the one that we can rely upon to protect ourselves. We should definitely get organized. We should definitely get a collective voice. We should definitely advocate our positions and our interests. On the other hand, if the macro environment is this erosion of rule of law, we have a lot of things to worry about.
Well,
yeah.
these prosecutions, and I'm a Democrat, so full disclosure, but these prosecutions of Jim Comey and Tish James and Bolton should send a chill through every person in this room, because if you are disfavored by whoever is in power, now it can be open season. I want to say, though, Governor, with all due respect, right, you said what I believe, which is that we have to build alliances. I think Joe said that we have to reckon with history and talk about our history. There are many people today who reject that. Many people in our community who reject that. Yeah. And I think we have to have that conversation with each other. They're big parts of our community, probably people in this room who don't agree with what we're saying right now on these issues. The reason why, by the way, I tell my Chinese restaurant story, which I model on your story, Governor Locke tells it much better about his father, who was a porter. But the reason why, and I wonder if you do too, the reason why I tell my story is not just because it's a good story, and not just because it resonates with this audience, because it resonates with other groups of people, with other immigrant communities. My Chinese restaurant story could easily be, a Latin or Mexican small convenience store story, right?
Or an Italian deli.
Or an Italian deli, right? Or a taco truck. And so the reason why I tell this story is because it invites other people in and build a relationship, and then to build power together.
Well, that's exactly what I did when I campaigned for governor. I gave the really short history of our family. Like, my grandfather came over at the turn of the century, worked as a houseboy, a servant for a family in the state capitol, washing dishes, sweeping the floors in exchange for English lessons. Later on, he moved up to Seattle and worked at a hospital, and then went back to China, got married, and had a family where my dad was born. Left the family, came back to the United States to work, but would send money back to the village to support the family, and eventually brought the whole family over. So my dad came over when he was about 12 or 13 years old, later joined the United States Army, was actually part of the Normandy invasion and part of the vicious battles all the way to Berlin under General Patton. And then after the war, he went to Hong Kong, met my mom, and they got married, brought her back to Seattle. So when I was sworn in, I joked that I'm moving into the governor's mansion exactly 1 mile from where my grandfather swept floors and washed dishes and served as a servant. And I said, here it is. It took us 100 years just to move 1 mile. But I use that story because that's really the experience, that's the American story of so many immigrant groups, whether they came from Ireland, Germany, Poland, France, and every place else. America really is a land of foreigners. Except for the Native Americans, we're all foreigners, whether we're first generation or 10th generation, whether our ancestors came on the Mayflower, a slave ship from Africa, or a steamer from Asia. We're all foreigners here. And I believe that it's that constant wave of new people, new ideas, new cultures, new ways of thinking that have really made America the innovative and freedom-loving and dynamic society that it is today. You talk about rule of law. Professor Wong, I used to give talks in China about what distinguishes America from so many other countries around the world, and I say it's our rule of law. That you can be a little person and you can sue the President of the United States. I mean, I had several friends when I was governor who sued me. They were good friends of mine, but they were representing interest groups or causes that they believed in. They felt that my administration was doing something improper or wrongly. And so I didn't take it personally, because I thought that's the role of our legal system, where anybody can sue anybody else.
Now.
I'm sorry?
You're giving us ideas now.
But you have to have faith in the courts, because people go to the courts, whether it's for child custody or an accident case or business dissolution, and you may not win, but you want to be able to walk away feeling that the judge listened, studied the case, and came up with a decision. The same way like a referee in a basketball game. They don't always get it right. But why do you keep playing? Because you really believe in the fairness of the system. And so you come back and you play. But if you don't have a good, strong legal system that is neutral, then you have countries where people have revolutions and they take to the streets and the military takes over because there's no confidence in the rule of law. And so that's why I think it's so important that we have a neutral court system. And I also am worried about what's happening in terms of this Justice Department. I'm a former prosecutor, and I believe in strong rules and prosecutions and judgment and sentences, but it's got to be fair. It's got to be really fair. And but let me just get back to the one point that you raised. Actually, several have, even Joe raised it. 5% of the population in Connecticut, less than 5% of the population in Connecticut is Asian. In the state of Washington, it was about 5% when I won. So why is it that you were able to win, William?
You know, you don't know this, but some of your folks about 15, 20 years ago invited me out to Seattle. Nancy somebody, I can't remember Nancy's last name.
Nancy Beery.
Yes, she had a fundraiser for me, and she said, William, why don't you move out to Washington State? You'll be a United States Senator the next day. We have more Asians here than in Connecticut. And the answer is I'm a Chinese Yankee. I was born in Connecticut, and I'm a New Englander. But I think I was able to win because our story is universal, and I lean into my story. I had a high school and college classmate named Peter Yang, and he's Korean American. And when I first ran for office, I asked him for money, for a contribution. And he helped me out, but he said, you know, you're running in a place where there's no Asian people. Maybe you should use your wife's name, Elizabeth Hotchkiss. You should run as William Hotchkiss. And I said, why would I do that? He said, well, there's all white people in your district, and they're all Republicans. I was a Democrat. And he said, maybe you can hide the fact that you're Chinese. And I said to him, Peter, look at me. I'm quite sure they know. And I think if you lean into this, our story is universal. And if you learn to talk about our experience, you talked about 100 years, how long it took your family. I worked in that Chinese restaurant 1985, 86, 87. In one generation, I went from that Chinese restaurant to being the Attorney General of the state of Connecticut, the 25th Attorney General. You're the 21st governor. Only in America. This doesn't happen in China, guys. Am I right? It doesn't happen in China.
That's true.
But it happens here. And it can happen here. And I think people still, even now, appreciate and embrace that truth.
Yeah. Professor, let's talk a little bit more about the Asian American Scholar Forum.
Yeah.
You talked about the case of Professor Chen, who was investigated, but MIT kept him on, continued to pay him, paid for his legal costs. Most other colleges and universities did not do that.
Absolutely.
As soon as a hint of suspicion, the professors were suspended, lost their privileges, lost their laboratories, and spent maybe $1 million on legal fees defending themselves before they were completely exonerated, and judges apologized for the conduct of the government. But then the universities wouldn't bring them back. Why? What's going on?
So I have to say, I have been profoundly disappointed with the university community as a whole, except my own university. And it is truly exceptional because MIT is probably the only university that came out and defended Professor Chen, paid all his legal fees, and stood behind him throughout the whole process. Most other universities, this is not a matter of money. Harvard didn't do that for its faculty. NYU,
Yale didn't do that for
Yale didn't do it.
Lin.
And so you can't say these universities are doing that because they don't have money. They have lots of money. And it is profoundly disturbing I don't think I can explain it except to say that truly, I work at 3 universities in the United States, and MIT is the most meritocratic institution. It's all about your work, nothing else. It's all about your accomplishment, nothing else. And so it's also very data-driven. They had the confidence that Professor Chen did nothing wrong through the research that they performed, whereas other universities gave incredible deference to the federal government when the federal government describes everything as related to national security. There's an automatic deference to the federal government. I think that deference, to some extent, is deserved, but when you realize that when the federal government is beginning to abuse that trust, you ought to have some sort of second thought. You shouldn't give the benefit of the doubt automatically to the federal government. When case after case, it has been shown that the considerations are not really very well thought of, that they came up with the charges that are totally trumped up. Just give you one example. One charge against Professor Chen was that he didn't disclose his other activities under this grant guideline. So at that time, when you apply for federal funding, they ask you to disclose activities related to your grant. One of the charges in the charging documents was that Professor Chen was doing some activity at a Chinese high school, right? I mean, there's really no connection between that activity and the grant that he was applying from the Department of Energy for, which is about energy storage. So they came up with all these fake charges, and then the politicized, in a highly politicized manner. And by the way, if you think that China Initiative has gone away, I just want to emphasize it has not. There is currently a bill in front of the Congress. So the first China Initiative was a Department of Justice initiative. So it's a departmental bureaucratic initiative. Now there is a bill to pass a law on China Initiative, tying the budget of the Department of Justice with the enactment or reenactment of a China Initiative activity. If the bill passes, we're going to face again this incredible serious situation in which the federal government will just go after you regardless of the evidence. And the other thing, let me just finish on this point. When Ambassador Locke was ambassador in China, at the time, the U.S.-China relationship, I wouldn't say was the best relationship, but at least it was a working relationship. Both governments encouraged exchanges of academic visits, academic exchanges and collaborations between the two governments. President Obama wanted to have 100,000 American students in China, and Chinese government also supported academic exchanges. Now the relationship is no longer as cordial as it was before, but you cannot possibly use the old standard, use the current standard to judge the behavior that was conducted under a time when the relationship was a very good one and encouraged by the universities. This is exactly what the federal government is doing. This is exactly what some of the university administrators are doing, and this is totally, totally unacceptable.
For those who don't know, the China Initiative, as Professor Wong indicated, was started under the Trump administration by the Justice Department. And it was really looking at a fear that Chinese American researchers, academics at colleges and universities were passing on sensitive information or state secrets, intelligence information to the Chinese government. And that those Chinese American academics and researchers had to be scrutinized and had to be brought to justice. And let me just say that it continued initially under the Biden administration, and a group of members of the Committee of 100, of which I chair, of Chinese Americans. It's an organization of Chinese Americans, including Yo-Yo Ma and I.M. Pei. They were the original founders. We had a group of Committee of 100 members who used to work in the Justice Department in very high-ranking positions. And some were U.S. attorneys appointed by Republican presidents, and some were Democrats. And they all went to the Justice Department, had a quiet meeting, and persuaded the Justice Department to modify the so-called China Initiative. And they made it much more broad, and they took away the focus just on Chinese American researchers. But as Professor Wong said, there's now a bill in Congress to bring back the China Initiative, to start targeting Chinese American researchers again at our colleges, universities. I want to switch a little bit to you, Joe. You, in your humor, you've taken pot shots at politicians, including former Vice President Biden at the time in Washington, D.C. at one of those correspondent dinners. Yeah. What was that like? And have you ever, in China, taken some critiques, lobbed some critiques at the Chinese government officials?
No. Yeah. That's why I'm here. Yeah, I kind of roasted Joe Biden, I don't know, it's like 14, 15 years ago. Yeah. Back then, a president could take a joke, you know. It's a very different now, you know, because I don't think that event is totally eliminated, right? The White House correspondence. Well, the White House is getting demolished too. Part of it, at least, yeah. So it's I mean, overall in America, I think the political climate is changing. Because back, even during Trump's first term, you can still make fun of him, and it's more acceptable. But now, if you make fun of Trump, especially in southern states or even in the Midwest, people get nervous. You know, even if when I do this in some suburbs in Los Angeles, still some people are nervous about it. So the climate has definitely changed a lot. But I don't know. Like, I have to say that you know, even though you're not making fun of politicians, I think Asian faces on TV is still very important. I still remember when I first came to America, that was in the mid-1990s. When I arrived, I saw in my friend's apartment, there was Margaret Cho was on TV, and Joy Luck Club was in the movie theaters. And that made me feel really good about this country. You know, I just feel this America is such a tolerant place. You know, I'm not leading a good life at the time. I don't even have health insurance. But I just feel good about this country being Asian here. And then after that, it's like nothing for 25 years until fresh off the boat. So my point is, even if
Crazy Rich Asians.
Yeah, Crazy Rich Asians. Even if we have achieved some visibility, we just have to keep fighting for it to keep that kind of visibility. Otherwise, it could be disappearing very soon.
Yeah. So, William, what do we need to do to raise that visibility, certainly in the halls of power, and whether it's should people be running for Congress, or you know, or should they be running for different offices?
No,
How can we get involved?
They should start with their local communities. And part of the reason why we don't have political power is because we haven't built a pipeline. We haven't focused on, I don't know maybe it's us. I think it is us a little bit, where we can't be bothered with.
Our parents wanted us to be academics, biochemists, and researchers like Professor Wong and Joe.
My parents wish I was like these two guys, but I'm like Gary instead. No, I think in our community we have neglected the school board, the town council, the board of finance, the state legislature. And when somebody who was a year behind me at Brown runs for president, we showered him with millions of dollars, and with all due respect to Andrew, he never was going to be president, ever. And so I think we have to focus on Everybody's from somewhere, you know, and if you're not willing or able to run for school board or the town council, encourage somebody else to. Encourage your children to get involved. The way I got involved is when I was 15 years old, the Attorney General of the state of Connecticut was running for the United States Senate. He was going to get killed. He had no chance at all. He was 30 points down to a 3-term incumbent, but he ran, and I was the only intern. His name was Joe Lieberman. And he beat Lowell Wacker by 1 percentage point. And I was 15 years old. It opened this entire world to this Chinese kid. And Joe Lieberman took care of me for years and years and years, and got me jobs and opportunities and internships. And in the first few hours of becoming Attorney General in 2019, I was in my office, secretary came in, said, Senator Lieberman is on the phone. And I picked up the phone, he said, I am so proud you are sitting at my desk.
That's great.
Wow.
Thank you. Professor Wong, you've commented a lot about U.S.-China relations. How do you see the current state of trade tensions and the political tensions between our two countries right now? Because I think a lot of that influences a lot of the businesses and the corporations that are here, whether they're American suppliers or companies started by Chinese nationals or Chinese Americans. What's happening?
So the trade war is not a very accurate description of what is going on. It is both about trade and technology. And for China, the technology control, right, the bans on the chips, the bans on the TSMC, NVIDIA's ability to sell to the Chinese
These are U.S. bans.
These are U.S. bans, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm talking about U.S. bans. These are always more important to the Chinese government than tariffs on Chinese products. So I think the recent meeting between President Trump and President Xi Jinping has moved a needle in the following sense. Not only does it reduce the average effective tariff rate from a roughly 57% effective tariff rate, not statutory tariff rates, from 57 to about 47. But 47 is still an incredibly high level. But I think there are also some softening on the technology side. And I think it is that softening that has persuaded the Chinese side to work with President Trump. I do believe that there is some optimism in terms of cooling the relationship cooling the temperature of the relationship between the two countries. Now there is a forcing mechanism, which is that President Trump is scheduled to visit China in April 2026. And then afterwards, President Xi Jinping is going to come to the United States. At least before these two visits, we do have a period of time when the lower level officials are going to work with each other to resolve some of the remaining issues, both on technology and on trade. My own view of trade war or real war, geopolitical war, is sort of peace is war delayed. So if you can delay the war, in South China Sea, on Taiwan, if you can delay the war by 1 year, by 2 years, by 3 years, that's a win. Right? And so to me, I think this is the best news that came from South Korea. I'm not a supporter of the current administration. I'm a Democrat as well. But on the other hand, I do want to criticize Biden administration for not doing two things. One is that they kept every tariff that Trump administration enacted, and they added some of the tariff. And by the way, as economists now know, that also to the inflation that happened during the pandemic years as well. That's one. And the other thing is that the Biden administration's first encounter with China was designed to be about ideology, about politics, right? So they had this Democratic Alliance summit. I thought that was not a good approach. You have to work with countries of different political systems. You have to respect other countries that have a very, very different political tradition. I support democracy. I choose to live in a democracy. But it doesn't mean that everybody else automatically accepts democracy, and history is very complicated, culture is very complicated. And also, ultimately speaking, politics and ideology are not something that you can resolve quickly. Whereas no matter what you criticize the Trump administration for, at least the relationship is all about these tangible problems, right? All these tangible problems have a tangible solution. And if the tariff is 100%, you reduce it to 50%. If there's a fundamental problem, then you work to solve that problem. If you start the relationship on ideology, there's no hope to find a mutually acceptable solution. So I think that the Trump administration has moved the needle meaningfully in that sense. One is more meaningful than the other, which is to start with the problems and then work on the solutions. The other is really correcting their own mistakes, right? So on Liberation Day, when the Trump administration announced 150% tariff on Chinese products, that's essentially a trade embargo, right? You cannot have meaningful trade activities with a country with a 150% tariff rate. Now you'll go back to basically the level prevailing before April 2nd. So essentially it's correcting your own mistake, but still, a correction is a correction. So I feel mildly optimistic, and if the two governments keep working, and another thing I want to criticize the Biden administration is, for the first 2 years, there was essentially a freezing of any contact between the two governments for the first 2 years. And then they began to build up the relationship with each other, and that was a good thing to do. Whereas if you look at what has happened this year, right? So this is 10 months into the second Trump administration, there has been already a summit meeting between the two presidents. To me, meeting with the other side, discussing issues with the other side are always better than not meeting with the other side.
Let me just add one thing. I'm a little bit more pessimistic, I think that the relationship will continue to be very, very tense. I think that the Trump administration is very transactional, as you indicated, Professor Wong, and they want to address some of these specific issues. But the Trump administration is still continuing to impose restrictions on what U.S. companies can send to China, especially, like you said, in the technology area, which China very much cares for. And so the way that the Chinese have retaliated is that they're copying the American system of export controls. America has export controls which say that American companies cannot sell to China certain things like chips or machines to make chips or software and things like that for artificial intelligence, for fear that this equipment, these chips, technology can be used by the Chinese military. So we, as William said, we invoke the claim of national security. And when a country says this is in our interest of national security, you can't quarrel with it. Who am I to say that France's national security considerations are wrong? That's how they feel. So what China has done now is they've adopted this same export control system, saying that certain things made in China cannot be sold to other parts around the world because it might be used for the military against China. So China now has said, we're going to restrict the export of rare earths. China makes about 95% of all the rare earths used in the world, and rare earths are used in these magnets which are highly resistant to high temperatures. And these magnets and rare earths are used in automobiles, your braking systems, your engines, but more importantly, they're used in American jet fighters, American submarines, American ballistic missiles, American satellites. And so China's saying, wait, if America won't sell us these chips because you're afraid that the chips will be used by our Chinese military, well, maybe we shouldn't sell America these rare earths because they're going to be used in your defense systems against us. So that's what a lot of the tension is right now, and in some ways, I I think it's forcing the two sides to figure out how they need to work together. What impact do you think this tension between the United States and China will have on American businesses and Chinese Americans, or just Chinese American citizens?
Yeah, so let me add one footnote to what you said, Ambassador. So there's a famous paper on how to get countries to cooperate, written by Robert Axelrod. And he has played computer games to simulate the best way to get the other side to cooperate. It turns out the best way to get the other side to cooperate is to do exactly what the other side is doing to you, right? So to some extent, the rare earth strategy is exactly the right strategy for China to play to get the US to understand that we have some bargaining leverage as well. I think previously the administration didn't really have the right idea about this. They thought, oh, China can only produce T-shirts and things like that. So they thought that they had the technological upper hand, and China didn't have that. So look at what happened after China announced the rare earth export control. The two leaders immediately got together. So I actually argue that China played the right card. The problem with that strategy is that it can get out of hand.
Right.
Then it is a disaster, right? So this time around, I think it kind of worked out. I think for the people in the audience, and also for my students, for my colleagues, I don't really have good advice other than to say that we just need to be extremely conscious about these tensions, and we cannot take it for granted that whatever that you do can be understood in a correct manner. Right. And so you need to really think through the things that you do, including the products that you produce, the products that you buy and sell. You really have to go extra mile. You know, so MIT now has instituted all sorts of protocols and procedures. I believe businesses should do the same.
Great.
And it's just to be on the safe side. And also the other I think there's a greater collective good benefit coming from that approach, which is that we don't want to weaponize some of the activities so that the politicians would have extra ammunition to attack the relationship between the two countries. And I do believe that engagement is still the right strategy to go, but we need to be extremely, extremely careful about how we do it, where we do it, and what kind of engagements that we do.
We have time for just a few questions from the audience. Anybody have a question? Let me see. Gentleman right over here. Stand up and speak up. Really loud.
Okay. My name is Arthur. So I was born and raised in China. And so when I first came to the United States, I thought I was a foreigner. That was my mindset. So I didn't really care about DEI at all. So if anybody say go back to China, I would say, okay, I'll go back to China, but maybe after I finish my master program. But you know, after I spend more and more time in the States, you know, I realized that people really don't care if you are from China or if you were born in the United States. If you look like a nation, you are a nation. So when our
So your question.
Okay. So what I found is in a corporate environment, it's very hard to pursue the career advancement is partly because we don't have enough representatives in senior management, not even in mid-tier management. So I think my question is, how can we break this?
How can you what?
How can we break this status quo?
Glass ceiling in corporate America?
Yes.
All right. Anybody want to tackle glass ceiling in corporate America? Joe.
I believe that's called bamboo ceiling.
Yes,
Very interesting. Yeah. I don't have a whole lot of positive experience in that aspect. But one thing I kind of learned later on is a lot of Chinese Asians are really hard workers, myself included. I remember when I was working.
You're a comedian. How can you be a hard worker?
But I wasn't joking when I was at work. I feel if I tell a joke, I'm cheating my employer. I'm just not getting paid for doing that thing. So I just work in the lab all the time. When I came out of the lab, my boss was like, "Where are you every day?" That's what he said to me. Then later on, I realized something. Even if you're a hard worker, you're proud of your job, just take 10 minutes out of your everyday life and communicate with your boss, your coworkers, people you supervise. And that is really critical. 10 minutes will probably doesn't affect your work that much, but you can establish a relationship. And that's really key to moving up in corporate America.
I found that the same thing in government, working as a young prosecutor. If I just put my nose to the grind and closed the door and worked on my cases and didn't really socialize or even chat with your colleagues, supervisors at the end of the day, just to say, hey, what's going on? What's going on? You want them to get to know you and feel comfortable with you. And they need to know that you believe in the company and the cause and that you're part of the team. So I think that's a key part of breaking through that bamboo ceiling. Another question from the audience.
Gary, can I also add to that? The only way to have CEOs and CFOs and members of the board of directors and partners at big firms is to demonstrate leadership. All of us and our technical skills are fungible. And you may think you're the best now, but 10 years from now, there's going to be somebody bigger, faster, stronger, right, from MIT, who's cheaper than you.
Not cheaper.
Right? And they'll replace you with that person. So the only way to distinguish yourself is to be a leader in your organization, whatever that organization is. And that is by playing the politics. Every organization has politics. And demonstrating your ability to build teams with other people and to lead them. And the only way you do that is get out of your office and get to know people.
Good point. A question over here. Yeah. Speak up.
Okay. Hi, my name is Charles. First, I want to thank you guys for sharing some of the stories. I have a similar story where Full Metal Jacket came out during when I was in school, and then we had friends looking at the food I ate, calling it a negative term, that sort of food. But really, it's a general question I've noticed.
Speak up again.
Yeah, really, the question is, for Asians, there's so much about us, the term mians and diobien are two really big things, right? And that causes us to be these stoic people where all these transgressions don't bother us or whatnot. How do we get past that? Because even in my family, right, I don't have a PhD, but everyone else has a PhD, every parent, and I'm still looked at as the black sheep. And we have this big cultural thing where it's all about, where mians is just such a big thing, right? We can't be honest, we can't take risks, we can't do these sorts of things. I'm very happy you became a comedian. I'm sure your parents have questions. My grandpa still thinks I'm a degenerate, right?
Me too.
So that's kind of the question, right? This mians, the diobien issue that we all run into.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I think you just have to remember, because a lot of times the mians or diulian or saving face is about embarrassment. I think over the time I realized that the only way to deal with an embarrassing situation is to make it even more embarrassing. Okay. Yeah, just forget about it. You do whatever you want to do. That's the only way you can actually forge through in your life. I totally understand. Shame is a big thing in Chinese culture, just like guilt in Catholic and Jewish culture. It's a really big thing, but what we do, we just have to just step our games and try to live the life we want to live and tell other people, this is my life. Once you do that, I'm pretty sure your PhD brothers and sisters will be jealous of you. Yeah.
Another question. Lady in the back.
Hi, I hope that I'm loud enough for everyone.
Yeah.
My name is Raven Duong. I am from World Business Chicago. I am a Vietnamese American U.S. Army veteran.
Yes.
Thank you for your service. Yeah.
I joined the U.S. Army 2 years after I came to the United States. So I am as American as all of you sitting up there that you are American. My question is, the social climate is different now, especially for my generation. A lot of non-Asian are actually adopting our culture, especially in food, which is good, but in some cases, we are seeing non-Asian capitalizing on what traditionally, historically, are Asian products. Like, for example, but not limited to, the French-Canadian Bubba company. I just want to know your feeling, and how, as lawmakers, how do we even come close to regulating something like that?
William, you want to tackle that?
Well, there's, you know, I grew up in a time when it was just me, and there were like 3 other Chinese American families in our region of Connecticut, and we all own Chinese restaurants. And you think it's bad, you know, when Full Metal Jacket came out, just, you know, being the only one and not having anybody understand who you are or where you come from, and always being viewed with suspicion, is incredibly challenging. And for a family, it's very hard, because you're always under the thumb of being the perpetual foreigner. And so I would say that it is a great thing to see Joe Wong have a comedy special and host the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I didn't love Fresh Off the Boat for a variety of reasons. I actually didn't love Everything Everywhere All at Once either. I'm like the only Asian American that didn't. But our visibility is changing our community, and frankly, even though there's a lot of anti-Asian hate there, the more they see us, the safer it becomes, and the more open opportunities are for all of us. So while I don't support cultural appropriation, if you think somebody is making a hot sauce or serving a bowl of noodles that is inauthentic, you should open your own restaurant and market your own hot sauce. That is what's great and beautiful about this country, is that we have this competition of ideas and cultures, right, and perspectives.
I mean, the reality is that recognition of our culture, I think, is a great thing. And appreciation of our culture and trying to emulate it. I mean, we have pizza restaurants that are run by Chinese Americans. We have Vietnamese pho that are run by Chinese. Sushi, you know, I mean, foods are being copied all across. We have, and so if it's inauthentic, then we just say, hey, we're doing a better one. You know,
Gary,
we're going to compete. Yeah.
Gary, can I just interject and say something in support of what Professor Huang said earlier? He acknowledged he's a Democrat, I'm a Democrat. The China scare is bipartisan, okay?
Yeah.
It's coming from both sides, or all sides, and it's not just with rare earths, and it's not just with academics. I've talked to people in this audience about laws banning Chinese nationals from purchasing property.
Florida and
Florida,
Texas.
right? I've sued Meta, and I'm investigating TikTok, and so I have a lot of concerns about social media as Attorney General, and I have a lot of issues with TikTok, but make no mistake, a lot of the criticism and the heat around TikTok is fueled by racism and xenophobia. It just is. And because they're a Chinese company, or at least they have Chinese ownership. So you have to recognize that that's there, and it's coming from many different places, and it's been there for a very long time. It's not new.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of laws in the United States Congress supported by Democrats and Republicans that have an anti-China bias, that anything related to ethnic Chinese, Chinese Americans, ethnic Chinese born and raised in the United States, U.S. citizens, that if you run a company, a technology company, somehow you are more loyal to Beijing, even though you may have never been to China. So that's why, you know, some of these proposals, I mean, the head of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee came out with a statement saying that every student from China studying in the United States, unless they are studying the classics, are all spies for Beijing government, every single one. And that's why they're proposing limits on the number of students coming here, as well as all these bans of, and scrutiny of Chinese American professors, and whispering campaigns against companies formed by Chinese Americans in Silicon Valley. Oh, you don't want to do business with that company because it was founded by this person of Chinese ancestry, and they might really be just, working for the Beijing government. So we're seeing, all this trade tension is actually having an impact on the attitudes of people throughout government, federal and state, saying that people, ethnic Chinese, are not Americans, not loyal to the United States, which is why in Texas, laws have been passed that say unless you're a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, you cannot own residential property, you cannot buy a house, and if you're a business, you cannot buy property for your business. And the same thing in Florida. I mean, people want to retire to Florida, but if you're not a green card holder, you cannot buy a house. And many other states are proposing the same types of laws, all because of a fear of anything related to China and Chinese ethnicity. So another question. All right, yes.
So my question is that in the 2016 presidential election, Andrew Yang very famously wore a cap that says "man" on top. And then so some people criticize it, saying that he's kind of exploiting the stereotype about Asian Americans and kind of making the matter worse because it strengthens the stereotype and also strengthens the issue of model minority. So I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on these tactics that sometimes you have to use in a political election? Well, how do you measure the results of getting better recognition versus do you think there are some long-term consequences of strengthening and perpetuating this kind of stereotype about Asians?
Look, I have a social media thing in Connecticut. It's called the Tong Tasting. And I take pictures of what I eat, and I talk about how great it is to celebrate local businesses. It's very often Asian food, very often Chinese food, because it's very meaningful to me. It's a big part of who I am and how I grew up. I think as long as it's authentic to you and real, and you're not exploiting a stereotype or trying to take advantage of a stereotype that is harmful and corrosive, I think we need to celebrate who we are and all things that make our culture beautiful and wonderful and accessible, right? It's becoming more and more accessible to people. They get it, right? They're no longer afraid of using chopsticks. And I think that ultimately makes it more possible for all of us to do all the things we want to do.
Joe, I mean, obviously you must confront this issue in your comedy.
Yeah, I mean, stereotype is a big thing. I think it's a double-edged sword. Yeah. I understand why some people are offended by the hat, because maybe at school they were bullied or taunted because of math. But on the other hand, if an Asian person is doing this, we should understand, he's kind of telling a joke to get people's attention, to get people to vote for them. I think Asian communities had this problem for a very long time. When Margaret Cho's show came out, a lot of Korean Americans were against it, saying, oh, the parents on that show are too stereotypical, or Margaret Cho's jokes are really shaming our community. The result is the TV network has to cancel the show because of that protest. Once that show was canceled, there wasn't any shows about Asian Americans for the next 25 years. So sometimes we have to accept certain stereotypes, even though we may not feel that comfortable with it. We could own it. It's not a bad thing to be good at math, to be honest. So yeah, that's my attitude. Same thing goes with those cultural appropriation stuff. Cultural appropriation, another name is, like what you said, acceptance. Right? If everybody dresses like Asian Chinese characters, so people know our history at least. So it's, for me, that's not a bad thing. Do whatever you can to make people accept you. That's the first step, I think. Yeah.
All right, one last question, and then we'll wrap it. Oh yeah, Professor Wong. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think my sort of understanding is that for a long period of time, many Chinese Americans feared being stereotyped. Yes. and then they wanted to get away from that. But I do believe that there ought to be a fundamental change in the way that we think about this issue. You know, who cares really about these stereotypes, and does it really affect you materially? Does it really affect your work, your lifestyle? If it does, then you'll care about it. If it doesn't, I believe that the new approach should be to get the American society to accept that, rather than trying to adjust ourselves to the existing norms and the habits and the styles of the society. I totally agree with Joe. If you read the recent article in New York Times about math in this country, there has been a substantial deterioration of math capabilities among American high school students in the last 10 years. You know, look at the AI war. The AI war is fought on math capabilities, right? So that stereotype maybe it's a stereotype, but it is a very good stereotype because it translates into national power and national economic prosperity. If Andrew Yang were to run for the president again, I urge him to wear that hat again and make the argument that this is the AI future is all about.
Yeah,
it's all about math.
Yeah, also I also want to add, to look at the Italian-American community. You know, they celebrate movies like Godfather, Sopranos. You know, these were some of the were really horrible stereotypes, but they're okay with it. You know, once the shows are out, everybody's talking about their community, which is actually boosting their the awareness of the Italian Americans. I think it's not totally a bad thing. You know?
So we should also watch more Bruce Lee movies too.
Can I add one thing though? And I know we're pressed for time, and I caution against buying into our own stereotypes. And so the challenging thing about the math stereotype is that, or the math hat, is that it does lend itself to the model minority myth. And we are not representative of the vast majority of Asian Americans. And there are a lot of folks who are not PhDs and aren't professors at MIT and aren't former governors and don't run companies. You know, growing up in a Chinese restaurant, if I walk in a Chinese restaurant, the first people I see are the waiters and the waitresses and the people that work in the kitchen. And a lot of them are working for less than minimum wage, no benefits, and many of them are undocumented. Those are our people too. And we have to remember them and make sure that we fight to give them the same opportunities that we've had.
Great. Good point. Good point. With that, thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, okay. I want to say something good about this panel, but you know, I'm part of it, so
You're free to say it as the afternoon moderator. Go right ahead.
I just want to thank the three distinguished guests. I learned a lot from each and one of you guys, and thank you again for sticking around until the end. We really appreciate this. And after this, there's going to be a reception at the foyer outside, and also there's another reception, VIP reception downstairs. So feel free to attend them and socialize. This is a great opportunity for us to know each other. Okay, thank you so much.
And the dinner is what time? The gala dinner?
Gala dinner is 6:30. Okay.
6:30. All right.
6:30. Okay. Well, we'll see you at 6:30. We'll have some great speeches, awards, comedy, and robotics shows. Okay.
All right. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really great. Nice meeting you again.